The biting Alaskan wind, sharp as a prospector's pick, whipped through the gaps in the ramshackle saloon, carrying with it the smell of stale whiskey and desperation. It was late autumn 1898, and the sun, a pale disk in the vast grey sky, offered little warmth to the remote mining town of Coldwater Creek. Thomas, a man whose face was etched with the harshness of the frontier, pulled his thick woolen coat tighter, the worn fabric doing little to fend off the pervasive chill that seemed to seep into his very bones. He stood near the back of the crowded room, his eyes as cold and grey as the November sky, scanning the motley assembly of grizzled miners, opportunistic traders, and desperate souls. He wasn't there for the usual Friday night revelry. Today was different. Today was the auction, as they called it, a grim euphemism for the sale of indentured servants, or worse, those who had nowhere else to go. A murmur rippled through the crowd as a man, burly and with a voice like grinding gravel, stepped onto a makeshift stage. "All right, folks, listen up. We got ourselves a fresh batch of opportunities here." Thomas scoffed internally. Opportunities for whom, he wondered. He'd come out of a morbid curiosity, perhaps a lingering hope that a simple tool or a sturdy pair of boots might be among the items sold off. His own life, much like the faded photographs he carried, was a collection of losses. A wife taken by the brutal winter, a son lost to the fever. All that remained were memories, as fragile as ice on a thawing spring lake. The first few lots were as expected. A strong young man for heavy labor, a robust woman for domestic chores. Thomas felt a dull ache in his chest, a familiar emptiness. He was about to turn and leave, the bitter taste of futility in his mouth, when the auctioneer's voice boomed again. Next up, a young lass, strong and willing, good for light work, a sharp mind, they say. Thomas hesitated, a strange prickle on his neck. Then she appeared. Small, perhaps 16 or 17, her clothes ragged, her hair matted, and her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and defiance, were the color of glacial ice. A rusted iron shackle was clamped around her ankle, connected to a short chain that disappeared beneath her tattered skirt. The sight made Thomas's stomach churn. He'd seen plenty of hardship, but this felt different, more insidious. As the auctioneer began his spiel, rattling off her supposed attributes, the girl, as if in a desperate attempt to assert her presence, opened her mouth and began to sing. Her voice, though trembling, was clear and pure, a haunting melody that cut through the raucous clamor of the room. Thomas froze. The air left his lungs in a silent gasp. It was impossible. The notes, the rhythm, the cadence. Every single inflection was an exact echo of the lullaby his mother had sung to him every night, a melody he hadn't heard since he was a small boy, a song he thought was buried forever with his past. The familiar melody, sung by this shackled girl, ripped through Thomas's carefully constructed wall of indifference, exposing the raw grief he had long suppressed. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the present with the phantom echoes of his childhood. How could she know that song? It was unique, a private melody, passed down through his family for generations. His mother had hummed it while mending clothes by lamplight, sung it softly as he drifted to sleep, a tender secret between them. Now hearing it from this desperate captive stranger, it felt like a ghost had walked into the room. The auctioneer, oblivious to Thomas's inner turmoil, continued his rapid-fire chant. "What am I bid for this fine specimen? She's got spirit, boys, a real fire in her eyes. Who'll start us off?" The men in the saloon began to call out numbers, low bids, their voices gruff and uncaring. Thomas barely registered them. His gaze was fixed on the girl, whose song had faltered, replaced by a look of confusion as she met his eyes. Was it his imagination, or did she seem to recognize something in his stunned expression? A desperate urge seized him, an impulse stronger than any he'd felt in years. He couldn't let her fall into just anyone's hands, not after that song. It felt like a sacred trust, a fragment of his past, demanding protection. His hand instinctively went to his pocket, feeling the familiar weight of the only money he possessed. 2 tarnished silver coins, barely enough for a week's rations. He'd intended to buy nails, maybe some lamp oil, essentials for his solitary existence in his remote cabin. But now those priorities evaporated. 2 coins! Thomas's voice, rough from disuse, cut through the clamour, startling not only the crowd, but himself. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to him, the reclusive prospector, the man who rarely spoke. The auctioneer's jaw dropped slightly before a greedy grin spread across his face. 2 coins! A fine bid, Thomas. Anyone higher? Going once? Going twice? No one challenged him. The others saw only a scrawny, worn-out girl, not worth the gamble. Thomas, however, saw a piece of his lost world. "Sold! To Thomas!" the auctioneer bellowed, slamming his gavel down with a finality that echoed in the sudden silence. The girl stared at him, her expression unreadable, a mixture of fear, bewilderment, and perhaps a flicker of something akin to hope. Thomas felt the full weight of his impulsive decision. He had just spent his last cent on a complete stranger, a girl who sang his mother's lullaby. He had no plan, no explanation, only the chilling echo of a song and the bewildering certainty that his solitary life had just irrevocably changed. The walk from the saloon to Thomas's cabin was a silent, awkward affair. The frigid air nipped at their exposed skin, and the snow, recently fallen, crunched under their worn boots. Thomas led the way, his shoulders hunched against the wind, his mind a whirlwind of questions. The girl, who he now knew as Elara, trailed a few paces behind him, her steps hesitant. The shackle on her ankle had been removed by the auctioneer, but the imprint on her skin was visible, a stark reminder of her recent plight. Thomas glanced back at her. Her face was pale, her lips chapped, but her eyes still held that unsettling intensity. He had tried to ask her about the song, about her past, but her only response had been a weary shake of her head. Perhaps fear had rendered her mute, or perhaps she simply had no answers to give. He didn't press. There would be time. For now, survival was paramount. His cabin, a humble structure of rough-hewn logs, stood on the edge of the tree line, a small plume of smoke rising from its stone chimney. Inside, it was Spartan but warm, thanks to the crackling fire in the hearth. The single room held a cot, a rough-hewn table, 2 stools, and shelves laden with mining tools, tins of food, and worn books. It was a bachelor's existence, quiet and self-sufficient. Now, with Elara standing awkwardly by the door, it felt suddenly small and strangely vulnerable. He pointed to the cot. "You can sleep there. I'll take the floor by the fire." Elara nodded, her gaze sweeping the room, taking in every detail. Thomas then set about preparing a simple meal, warmed beans and dried jerky, washed down with hot tea. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. Thomas observed Elara surreptitiously. She ate slowly, deliberately, as if savouring each mouthful, a stark contrast to the urgency he'd seen in other hungry people. There was a quiet dignity about her, despite her circumstances. As the evening wore on, the tension in the cabin began to ease, replaced by a fragile sense of shared understanding. He offered her a clean blanket, and she wrapped it around herself, a small gesture of comfort in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. Before she lay down, she looked at him, her eyes holding a deep, unspoken question. Thomas knew what it was. Why him? Why had he, a stranger, spent his last coins on her? He had no answer he could articulate, not yet. He simply nodded, a silent promise hanging in the air. For now they were 2 lost souls, bound by a mysterious song and the harsh realities of the Alaskan frontier, navigating an uncertain future together. The news of Thomas's impulsive purchase spread through Coldwater Creek like wildfire, fueled by gossip and the sheer strangeness of the act. The grizzled miners, used to their own brand of rough justice, scratched their beards and muttered, "Thomas, buying a lass, what's he got planned?" Some speculated, their imaginations running wild. Others, more pragmatic, worried about the extra mouth to feed, especially with winter setting in with a vengeance. Thomas, however, was oblivious to the town's murmurings. His focus was solely on Elara. Days turned into a week, then two. Elara slowly began to open up, though still sparingly. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft, almost a whisper, as if years of silence had made it fragile. She spoke of being an orphan, of a life spent moving from one harsh place to another, always on the fringes. But when Thomas asked about the lullaby, her face would cloud over, and she would divert the conversation, or simply fall silent. It was clear the song held a deeper, more painful significance for her, and Thomas respected her unspoken boundary, for now. Their routine settled. Thomas continued his daily prospecting, though with less intensity, always returning to the cabin by sundown. Elara, in turn, kept the small cabin tidy, mended clothes with surprising skill, and prepared their simple meals. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her presence a comforting warmth in the previously solitary space. He noticed small things about her, her meticulous neatness, the way her eyes lingered on the faded map on his wall, her surprising resilience despite her apparent fragility. One afternoon, Thomas ventured into town for supplies. The air was colder, a precursor to the true Alaskan winter. As he loaded sacks of flour and dried meat onto his sled, Silas, a taciturn old trapper known for his keen observations, approached him. "Heard you got yourself a new shadow, Thomas," Silas grunted. His eyes narrowed. "That girl, she got a history with the wrong sort, the kind that don't forget debts." Thomas's grip tightened on the rope of his sled. "What do you mean, Silas?" Silas spat a stream of tobacco juice into the snow. "Saw her with a man weeks back before the auction. A big, mean-looking fellow wearing a strange medallion. He was rough with her, too. Heard him talking about unfinished business, something about a family secret. Keep your eyes open, Thomas. Not everyone in these parts plays fair, and some pasts have long, sharp claws." The warning hung in the air, chilling Thomas more than the biting wind. He thanked Silas and hurried back, a new knot of worry forming in his stomach. Elara's silence about her past, combined with Silas's ominous words, painted a picture of a dangerous history, one that could very well catch up to them in the desolate expanse of the Alaskan wilderness. You're halfway through this captivating story. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss a single moment of Thomas and Elara's journey. Silas's words gnawed at Thomas. The image of the medallion man haunted his thoughts, casting a long shadow over the fragile peace he and Elara had begun to build. He found himself more vigilant, his senses heightened, constantly scanning the horizon, listening for sounds beyond the howling wind. Elara, though still guarded about her past, seemed to sense his growing unease. She would occasionally glance at him with a worried expression, her eyes mirroring his unspoken fears. One evening, as the northern lights painted the sky with ethereal greens and blues, Thomas finally pressed her. "Elara," he began, his voice gentle but firm. "Silas, he said he saw you with a man with a medallion. Do you know who he is?" Elara flinched, her small frame tensing. She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "His name is Kyle. He said he was an uncle, but he was cruel. He brought me here, said I was property." Her eyes welled up, and a tear traced a path down her dust-stained cheek. He had a silver medallion shaped like a bear claw. Thomas's blood ran cold. A bear claw medallion, the very symbol associated with a notoriously brutal mining syndicate that operated in the more remote reaches of the territory. They were known for their ruthlessness, for exploiting vulnerable individuals, and for having long memories. "What did he want with you, Elara?" Thomas asked, his voice strained. She shook her head, tears now falling freely. "He spoke of my mother, said she owed him, that I was the payment. He kept asking about a hidden place and a map. But I don't know anything. My mother, she died when I was very young. I remember almost nothing of her, only the lullaby." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. Thomas felt a surge of protectiveness. The pieces were slowly falling into place. Kyle wasn't just some random brute. He was connected to Elara's past, and perhaps to his own. The lullaby, the only link to Elara's mother, was also his. The coincidence was too profound to ignore. He realized then that his impulsive act at the auction had intertwined their destinies far more deeply than he could have imagined. Kale, with his bear claw medallion and his talk of hidden places, was a direct threat. Thomas knew he couldn't face this alone. The isolation that had once been his solace now felt like a dangerous trap. He needed help, and the only place to find it was among the very people he had tried to avoid, the community of Coldwater Creek. He would have to shed his reclusiveness and trust others, for Elara's sake, and perhaps for his own. Thomas found himself walking through Coldwater Creek with a new purpose. No longer just a ghost drifting between his cabin and the supply store. He needed to gauge the town's pulse, to see who could be trusted. His first stop was Silas, the trapper whose warning had proven so prescient. He found Silas mending traps outside his small, cluttered shack, the scent of cured furs hanging in the air. Thomas recounted Elara's revelation about Kale and the bear claw medallion. Silas listened, his weathered face impassive. "The Bear Claw Syndicate," he grunted, a grim look in his eyes. "They're troubled, Thomas. Been sniffing around these parts for months, looking for something. Gold, mostly. But if they're after a hidden place and a map from the girl's mother, it might be more than just a typical claim." He paused, his gaze sharp. "This means they won't give up easily. You've got a target on your back now, too." Thomas nodded, a cold dread settling in his stomach. "I need help, Silas. I can't protect her alone." Silas considered this, then slowly nodded. "There are good folk here, Thomas. Hard-nosed but fair. Old man Hemlock, the store owner, he's seen more winters than most, and he's got a quiet wisdom. And Martha, the saloon keeper, she's got eyes and ears everywhere, and a surprisingly soft heart under that gruff exterior." He offered a rare, thin smile. "And of course there's me. I owe you for that wolf pelt you helped me track last spring." Emboldened, Thomas approached Hemlock. The old man, perched on a stool behind his counter, listened patiently as Thomas laid out the story, carefully omitting the personal detail of the lullaby. Hemlock stroked his long white beard. "This Kyle and his syndicate, they operate on fear, but fear can be overcome if people stand together. Coldwater Creek looks out for its own, Thomas. You and that girl, you're part of it now." His words, simple and direct, offered a surprising comfort. Later, Thomas spoke to Martha at the saloon. She was polishing glasses, her expression stoic. When he explained the threat, her eyes hardened. "That Kale tried to stir up trouble here before. He's a snake. We don't take kindly to snakes in our town, especially not when they threaten a lass who's done no harm." She paused, then added, "Word travels fast here, Thomas. If Kale shows his face, we'll know, and we'll be ready." As Thomas walked back to the cabin, the icy wind no longer felt so desolate. He felt the hesitant warmth of human connection, the fragile tendrils of trust extending towards him. The town, once a collection of solitary figures, was beginning to feel like a community. But even with their support, the shadow of Kyle and the Bear Claw Syndicate loomed large, a reminder that the true test of their newfound unity was yet to come. Winter tightened its icy grip on Coldwater Creek. Snow fell relentlessly, blanketing the landscape in a stark white expanse. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, and the isolation of the frontier became more pronounced. Yet within the small cabin, a sense of purpose, fueled by the brewing threat, kept Thomas and Elara vigilant. They spent evenings by the fire, Elara drawing crude maps in the dust, trying to recall fragments of her journey, any detail that might hint at the hidden place Kyle sought. Her memories were fragmented, elusive, like wisps of smoke in the frigid air. The community, true to their word, became their silent network. Miners returning from their claims would pass by Thomas's cabin, offering a nod, a brief exchange, and a subtle report. Heard talk downriver, or saw a strange face in town, didn't look like a local. Thomas reciprocated, sharing his dwindling supplies, offering help with repairs, slowly building the bonds of camaraderie he had long eschewed. One biting afternoon, Hemlock arrived at the cabin, his face grave. "Thomas," he said, stepping inside, a gust of frigid air following him. A group of men, rough-looking, just rode into town. One of them matches Cale's description. Bear claw medallion and all. They're asking about a girl from the auction. Elara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Thomas felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp. "They found us," he murmured, his mind racing. He looked at Elara, her face pale with fear. "It's time, Elara. We need to be ready." Hemlock nodded. "Martha's already spread the word. The men are gathering at the saloon. We'll face them together. But you and Elara, you shouldn't be here when they come. You need to hide." A fierce defiance flashed in Thomas's eyes. "I won't run, Hemlock. Not after all this. And Elara needs to know she's not alone. We'll face this with the others." He knew the risks, but the thought of fleeing, of letting Kyle terrorize them, was unbearable. He looked at Elara, whose initial fear had given way to a quiet resolve. She nodded, confirming his decision. Hemlock sighed, a mix of concern and grudging respect in his eyes. "Very well, but stick close to the back. We'll put the strongest men out front. They'll be looking for a fight, Thomas, and they won't play fair." The old man left, leaving behind the heavy silence of impending conflict. Thomas looked around his small cabin, once a sanctuary, now a potential battleground. The tools on his shelf, once used for digging gold, would soon be used for defending a life. Outside, the wind howled, a mournful lament, or perhaps a rallying cry. The storm had arrived, and Coldwater Creek was preparing to stand its ground. This is a critical turning point. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and have notifications on to see how Thomas and Coldwater Creek confront the danger. The saloon, usually a place of rowdy laughter and boisterous card games, was now filled with a tense, simmering silence. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and anticipation. Miners, trappers, and townsfolk stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces grim, their hands clutching whatever makeshift weapons they possessed. Pickaxes, shovels, hunting rifles, even stout pieces of timber. Martha, a formidable presence behind the bar, had distributed bottles of whiskey, not for drinking, but for fueling the resolve in their eyes. Silas, his weathered face set in a determined scowl, stood beside Thomas, a loaded rifle cradled in his arms. Elara, clutching a small, tarnished locket she'd found in her tattered possessions, stood behind Thomas, her fear now replaced by a surprising stillness. Suddenly, the saloon doors burst open with a crash, letting in a swirl of snow and the chilling gust of the Alaskan night. Kyle stood framed in the doorway, a menacing figure. He was a large man, his face scarred, his eyes glinting with a cold, predatory light. The silver bear claw medallion gleamed on his chest. Behind him, a half-dozen equally rough-looking men, their faces hardened by a life of brutality, filled the entrance. Cale's gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on Elara, a sneer twisting his lips. "Looking for a stray little bird, folks," he growled, his voice a low rumble. "She belongs to me. Hand her over, and there'll be no trouble." "She ain't property here," Martha's voice, surprisingly strong, cut through the tension. "And she ain't leaving with you." Kyle laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you can stop us, old woman? This is a private matter. We just want what's ours." "What's yours is a young girl you terrorized." Thomas stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "She's under our protection now." Cale's eyes narrowed, his gaze locking onto Thomas. "So it's you, the fool who bought my property. You have no idea what you're meddling in, Prospector. This girl holds a secret, a fortune that belongs to my family, and I'll tear this town apart to get it." The words hung in the air, a direct challenge. The other men from the syndicate shifted, their hands going to their weapons. Before Cale could give the order, Silas raised his rifle, aiming directly at Kyle's chest. "Take one more step, Cale, and you'll be meeting your maker." A tense standoff ensued. Kyle looked around at the united faces of Coldwater Creek, their expressions resolute, their weapons poised. He had expected a handful of scared individuals, not a unified front. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the pounding of hearts. The odds were against him now. He had underestimated the spirit of these people. Cale's eyes, filled with cold fury, flickered between Silas's unwavering aim and the determined faces of the townsfolk. He snarled, a low guttural sound, realizing he had miscalculated. This was not the frightened, disorganized settlement he had expected. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice laced with venom. "You'll regret this, every last one of you. The syndicate never forgets." With that, he turned, his men falling in behind him, and stormed out of the saloon, disappearing into the swirling snow. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, quickly followed by a triumphant cheer. The tension evaporated, replaced by a sense of pride and camaraderie. People clapped each other on the back, relief evident in their smiles. Thomas felt a profound sense of gratitude. These people, who had been strangers just weeks ago, had stood by him, protecting Elara. He looked at Elara, her eyes wide, tears of relief now streaming down her face. She rushed forward, hugging him fiercely, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forged in shared peril. In the days that followed, an uneasy peace settled over Coldwater Creek. Kyle and his men were gone, but the threat of their return lingered like a ghost in the long Alaskan nights. Thomas and Elara, however, no longer lived in fear. The experience had galvanized their connection, and Elara, finally feeling safe, began to speak more freely about her past. She remembered scattered details, a small cabin by a hidden waterfall, a mother who hummed the lullaby while studying strange maps, a recurring dream of a large, flat rock carved with symbols. Thomas realized the full weight of Kyle's obsession. The hidden place and map weren't just about gold. They were about something unique, perhaps a rich vein of ore or a secret family claim, guarded by the very song that had brought them together. Elara's mother, it seemed, had a deeper history, one intertwined with the land itself. One crisp morning, Elara, with a newfound clarity, pointed to a section of Thomas's old weathered map, a remote, uncharted area deep in the wilderness. "This," she whispered, her finger tracing a faint line, "this feels like the place my mother spoke of, the waterfall, the rock." Thomas looked at the spot, a challenging multi-day journey even in good weather. The risks were immense, but a spark of hope ignited within him. The lullaby, once a haunting reminder of loss, was now a beacon, guiding them towards a truth that could finally bring Elara peace, and perhaps a new beginning for them both. The price of their freedom had been a stand against oppression, And now, the path to a deeper understanding lay before them, demanding courage and resolve. The journey was arduous. The Alaskan winter, unforgiving, tested their limits. Thomas, Elara, and Silas braved snowdrifts, frozen rivers, and biting winds. Days blurred into a grueling cycle of travel, but Elara's quiet strength and resilience proved a constant inspiration. Her presence, huddled close during frigid nights, slowly thawed the ice around Thomas's heart. After nearly a week, guided by Elara's fragmented memories and the land's cues, they found it. Tucked away in a secluded valley, a frozen waterfall stood beside a massive flat rock. As Thomas cleared snow, he revealed intricate carvings, symbols, lines, and an ancient stylized map. It was exactly as Elara had described. "This is it," Elara whispered, her eyes wide with awe. "This is what my mother protected." Thomas, recognizing geological markers, realized the rock was a precise guide to a remarkably rich vein of gold. It was a discovery that would change their lives, a legacy Elara's mother had left, nearly stolen by Kyle. As they stood, contemplating their find, Elara hummed the lullaby. Her voice, clear and strong, filled the wilderness with peace and belonging. The lullaby, once a painful echo of his past, had become a bridge between their lives, a testament to resilience and hope. They returned to Coldwater Creek, not as reclusive prospector and rescued girl, but as partners. The community cheered, their respect evident. The carved rock's information would bring prosperity to the town. But for Thomas, the true treasure wasn't gold. It was Elara's presence, their bond, and the realization that even in the harshest lands, with support, new life and purpose could blossom from loss. Alaska, once a symbol of isolation, became the crucible where two lost souls found a home together. The lullaby now echoed a universal truth. Even in the deepest freeze, the human spirit, with the right connections, could find its thaw.